There are several papers on the back table, and we're not going to have time to go through them all. I know that. But I want you to look at the one first that says Acts 28 at the top. Now, this exercise is a little bit of a 8:13. You have the Greek text at the very top. The KJV is quite a straightforward translation except for one thing. And so it's the KJV, King James Version, the Authorized Version says, "From thence we fetched a compass and came to Rhegium. And after one day the south wind blew, and we came the next day to," and I don't know how to pronounce it, I think it's Putelli? Would it be Putelli? I'm not Italian. This is on the foot of Italy. Paul was on his way to Rome. Now, the problem is we fetched a compass. What in the world does that mean? And was that even possible? When was the compass as we know it invented and utilized? I know there were lodestones and things like that, but the compass as we know it, the needle compass that points to the north and so on and so forth, I don't think it came into common use until the Middle Ages. So how did Paul, living in the first century, fetch a compass? The answer is that in 1611, when King James Version was being translated, this was an English-ism. It was a seafarer's term that meant to make a circle. So it didn't mean literally to go fetch a compass. Go get my compass. I don't know what, we're lost. Go get my compass. No, it meant to make a circle, or a semicircle, or a circular type move. That was the English language of the day. Now, I don't think anybody understands that today, unless they happen to be from England and they know, or they're an expert in 1611 English language. So it makes much more sense, doesn't it? Look at King James 21. That's a redone version of King James. "And from thence we followed a circuitous course and came to Rhegium." That's much closer to what the original word means. "And a day later the wind blew," etc., etc. The ASV, the American Standard Version, "From thence we made a circuit and arrived at Rhegium," and so on and so forth. And the Amplified Bible, here's where we get into wrapping up interpretation with straightforward translation. "From there we sailed around and arrived at Rhegium on Italy's southern tip. And a day later a south wind came up, and on the second day we arrived at Putelli. From there, after making a circuit along the coast, we reached Rhegium." Oh, I'm repeating myself. So there they have sailed around, which still gets at that idea of making a circular or semicircular motion. What happened, however, is that with the fame of the King James Version and its total dominance of the English language Bible for many years, that many translators just took the lead from the King James translators and used that terminology. So it was continued, it was perpetuated through English translations for quite a while. And in the modern era, with the newer translations, most all of them have come up with a way to express making a circle or a circuit. It's just the way the ship sailed from port to port. You rarely make a straight line, right? Go out a little bit, you circle back to the next port. One thing I wanted to point out, though, if you turn the page, look at the end of the second page, NRSV. Then we weighed anchor and came to Rhegium. And also the NRSV ACE, we weighed anchor. And the next couple of them do the same thing. The NTE, we raised anchor. And the OJB, when we weighed, then we weighed anchor and arrived at Rhegium. And finally, the RSV goes back to the circuit. From there, we made a circuit and arrived at Rhegium. So somehow somebody got the idea that this rather little used Greek word meant to weigh anchor. And that you could earn your doctorate in New Testament Greek by studying that and figuring out where they came up with the translation weighed anchor. So anyhow, a little illustration of how and why English translation must always look at itself, see what needs to be changed and what needs to be improved. God's word does not change. The translation changes because the language changes. We don't speak like Shakespeare anymore. Our English is more modern. Matter of fact, watching all of, I watched a little bit I could take only a little bit of the Queen's pomp and circumstance for her funeral. And God bless the Queen, God rest her soul. I'm sure she's a Christian woman. I don't even know if she would have wanted all of that, but wow, talk about pomp and circumstance, my goodness. But listening to those folks, I thought, at some points, do we even speak the same language? I didn't always understand what they were saying. So yes, the English language evolves and changes, as does every other human language. And that's why our translations change. And sometimes for very good reason, like this example I showed you today. Okay, any questions or discussion on that? Yeah.
On the second page, I never heard of it. Where did they come up with all that extra stuff?
Oh, Phillips, he's commenting as well as translating. So, yeah.
So it's not a true translation.
No. He's conflated several different verses of the same trip.
I didn't know if maybe he had done research in other areas to come up with those
No.
statements.
He's conflated several different verses from the same trip.
So it's more opinion than anything.
Yeah. And I think that includes the verse, one or two verses before the actual verse.
Okay.
So remember also the chapters and the verse numbers as we have them, they are not in the original manuscripts. Those came about a guy named Stephanus about somewhere in the 1500s, or maybe a little earlier than that. He decided it would be handy if we numbered the chapters and the verses. And if you recall, when Jesus quotes scripture, he never quotes chapter and verse, because there was no chapter or verse. Now he could say the 23rd Psalm, those were numbered, and the Proverbs were numbered, I believe. But the rest of the prophets and the history books were not numbered with chapters and verses. So that's a human invention. Those are not inspired. And that would be a worthy study for another day, to go through part of the New Testament, maybe one of Paul's letters or one of the Gospels. And if you've ever been reading along and say, why are we starting a new chapter? The same thought is going on as the previous chapter. Well, it was a mistake by Stephanus. He decided to break it into a new chapter for no other reason than to break it into a new chapter. So that's that too can be a flaw in our English texts, but it's not a flaw in the original manuscripts because they didn't exist in the original manuscripts. Anything else from this example? So when you're out sailing and you need to get back to port, remember to fetch a compass. Okay. The next one I want to show you let's look at Ephesians chapter 2, verse 8. The reason for this is I want to demonstrate that while there are different English translations, the legitimate ones agree 90, 95, I don't know, 99% of the time, except for word order, punctuation, things like that. They agree very, very closely. Look at one of the most famous verses in our Lutheran theology. By grace are ye saved through faith, and that not of yourselves. It is the gift of God. And if you go down the list, that was King James 21. American Standard Version has the very same thing, for by grace have you been saved through faith, and that not of yourselves, it is the gift of God. And it will get boring after a while. Go down to some of the others. CSB, you are saved by grace through faith. It is not of yourselves, it is God's gift. Okay, so he's got God's gift instead of gift of God. Darby, for you are saved by grace through faith, and this is not of yourselves, it is God's gift. EHV, indeed it is by grace that you have been saved through faith, and this is not from yourselves. It is the gift of God. So I'm showing you all these different translations. They have looked at the Greek. It's a simple sentence, no reason to change it much, and they all have almost exactly the same translation. Some of the versions that are not and don't claim to be true translations, but interpretations, change it a little bit. I'm trying to find one here.
Last page.
Which one?
Voice.
Oh, the Voice. For it is by God's grace that you have been saved. You received it through faith. It was not our plan or our effort. It is God's gift, pure and simple. You didn't earn it. Not one of us did. So don't go around bragging that you must have done something amazing. Well, that's pretty good. That's a pretty good commentary on Ephesians 2, isn't it? But hardly a word-for-word translation. And
Italics in various places.
well, in King James, in KJV, and I think RSV also, it means that the word has been supplied. For example, trying to find one where.
The third one down is the second one down.
The American Standard Version, yeah, the King James didn't have that, so I'm not sure about that one. But in the King James, if you see an italicized word, it means it was supplied. It makes better English. It wasn't necessarily in the original. In Greek, for example, you don't have to have an and. You just put two things together, and there's an and. Understood. You don't always have to have the article. I took up the book in my arms, and I took book to the shelf. So I don't need to say the book again. I just said the book. And so you don't have to repeat that. So in English, you would supply the. That makes better English. But in Greek, they didn't do that. All right? So again, here's a very important theologically important verse, Ephesians 2:8. And of course, I could have added 9 and 10, but for simplicity, I just did 8, showing that none of these translations are going to lead you astray or into heresy. They all bear witness to the truth of what that verse is saying. Are some more accurate? Yes. Are some more word for word? Yes. But none of them would lead you astray. The next one I want to show you, it does the same thing, and that's John 3:16. Do you all have that one? John 3:16. In Greek, you all know this verse. I'll say it in Greek. Houtos gar agapezen hotheos ton cosmen hostiton wion ton monogene edoken. Hinapos hon pistiuon eis auton me apoletai ala exe zoen Ionian. And King James is a very word-for-word translation. For God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten Son. The only thing it does there, in the Greek, the subject is ho theos, God, and it sounds better in English. We like to have our subject at the start of the sentence, don't we? So they moved it up to the front. For God so loved the world. The Greek would say, thus for he loved the God, the world. Well, that's not good English. That's just word order. For God so loved the world, he gave his only begotten Son. And again, all of these versions, what is to mess up in that verse? The words are not difficult. How can you mess that up? His only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish, but have life eternal, everlasting life. And so much of the Bible is that way. Think of the simplicity of John 3:16. And so much of the Bible is that way. Simple words that can be easily translated and accurately translated into English. Now, the thoughts behind simple words, sometimes a different story. That God, for example, let us make man in our own image. There's the doctrine of the Trinity, right? But the words are very simple. Us. You stop and say, wait a minute, who's us? Let us make man in our own image? Who's us? More than one God? No, 3 persons in one God. Let us make man in our own image. So, but the words are, for the most part, easy to translate. I show you a couple of examples this way because I don't want you to be troubled by people that say, you can't trust the modern translations. Have you ever seen Greek? It is so hard to translate into English. No, it's not. No, it's not. With a little learning and some helpful dictionaries and grammar books, it's not difficult at all. Now, there are difficult verses in the Bible. There are some. But by and large, they are quite simple. And this is just an illustration of that. Anything you want to talk about on that? So if anybody says, have you ever seen John 3:16 in Greek? You can say, yeah, I've got one in my file.
I noticed that some of them don't say begotten Son. Just say Son.
Or unique Son.
The ESV, for example, just says
Monogene. Monogene is the word in the original. So that is either only begotten or firstborn son. And the translators have usually chosen only begotten. Yeah.
The CJB.
CJB, for God so loved the world, he gave his only and unique Son. Yeah, you know, it gets...
Doesn't talk about, it doesn't give me the impression of that he was born.
That's lacking, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's a subpar translation. It wouldn't lead you into heresy, I don't think. But monogene is pretty well established in Christian theology. It goes back to the Trinitarian controversies that brought about the creeds, the ecumenical creeds. And Christ is the monogene, the only begotten Son of God. He didn't beget many sons, that's the point. He had one son. Mono, you hear that word mono in there, mono. And gene, as in Genesis. He generated one mono son. Anything else on that? All right. The next one, look at the 23rd Psalm. Now we're going to do this backwards. At the top is the old King James Version that everybody is usually familiar with. On the bottom half is the 23rd Psalm in the Living Bible. Everybody have that? I want you to read aloud with me from the Living Bible version of the 23rd Psalm. All right? We'll wait till a couple sit down here. We've got a couple that still need it. All right, 23rd Psalm, Living Bible. Here we go together. Because the Lord is my shepherd, I have everything I need. He lets me rest in the meadow grass and leads me beside the quiet streams. He gives me new strength. He helps me do what honors him the most. Even when walking through the dark valley of death, I will not be afraid, for you are close beside me, guarding and guiding all the way. You provide delicious food for me in the presence of my enemies. You have welcomed me as your guest. Blessings overflow. Your goodness and unfailing kindness shall be with me all my life, and afterwards I will live with you forever. How does that strike you? How does that strike you? Yeah, that's my next question. Now say it again without looking. There are some questionable things there. The Living Bible is a paraphrase, of course, and doesn't claim to be a translation. But now let's read it together in the more familiar King James Version. Together now. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside still waters. He restoreth my soul. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of my enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. All right. That version of Psalm 23 will be treasured in the Christian church, the English-speaking Christian church, forever, won't it? Yeah.
There's a table before me and it says, provide me delicious food.
I'm going to talk about that in just a minute. It's an example of one of the things that has been handed down to us through the King James Version that is so ingrained in the English Christian consciousness. I don't see any value in changing it. There's nobody that misunderstands it. If they did, they would misunderstand all the other translations as well. I don't see it ever losing its spot as the way that we say the 23rd Psalm. Now, at my funeral, you may say the 23rd Psalm. But if you read it from the Living Bible, I will come up out of the grave and stop you. All right, let's look at it a little more closely. The Authorized Version, the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. The Living Bible, because the Lord is my shepherd, I have everything I need. Any substantial difference there?
What you want and what you need are two different things.
Yes. In 1611, when you said, I have neighbors that are wanting food, it meant that they were starving. They needed food. So the language has changed a little bit. But you're right, now what you want and what you need are two different things. So that's not too bad. Because the Lord is my shepherd, instead of just saying the Lord is my shepherd. There's one of those italics you were asking about, Alice. The word is, the Lord is my shepherd. That is supplied in the English translation. It's not there. It doesn't need to be there in the Hebrew. It's simply taken for granted. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Yes, it is because the Lord is my shepherd that I will have everything I need. Is that necessarily an improvement? I would say no, except to point out the different meaning of the word want and need from 1611 until now. Verses 2 and 3, he maketh me to lie down in green pastures. He leadeth me beside the still waters. Let's take that. He lets me rest in the meadow grass. I think there was a reaction there to the sound of he maketh me to lie down. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. And here it sounds much more optional, right? He lets me rest in the meadow grass. No, the shepherd leads the sheep to where they are supposed to eat, and he makes them eat there. And if he's not careful about where he leads the sheep to eat, and he makes them eat at a certain spot in a certain part of the pasture, you know what happens. Sheep will eat the grass to the roots, and they'll kill it. So the shepherd has to be very careful about that. He leads me beside the quiet streams. I don't think that's different from beside the still waters. Stylistically different, yes. Meaning, I don't see any real difference there. He gives me new strength instead of he restoreth my soul. Soul in the Old Testament was used in slightly different ways. Soul, of course, describes that spiritual part of you that goes to God when you die, and so on and so forth. You are a living soul also. It speaks in Genesis, it speaks that way of the animals. They are living souls. There's that part that animates them, that makes them move and think and react and do all the things that animals do. So we are living souls in that sense too. Here he restoreth my soul. The nice thing about it is, yes, he restores us with what we need for our bodies, but he also restores my spirit, my soul, with food that only he has. And maybe the Living Bible doesn't quite grasp that as well. He gives me new strength, it said. He gives me new strength and helps me to do what honors him the most. Well, that's in place of he leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. That's important. He leads me. He leadeth me. He helps me. Well, I guess he does, but first of all, he leads me in the paths, not of what honors him the most, but the paths of righteousness. And that is very carefully defined in the Bible. What is the path of righteousness in the Bible, in the Old Testament, since the Psalms are in the Old Testament? What's the path of righteousness? We call it the 10 Commandments. Yeah. It's not just some other path of your imagination that might honor God. My goodness, people would come up with all kinds of stuff. As many people as you ask might have a list of what they think honors God. Kirk Cousins probably thinks one of the highest honors of God is being an NFL quarterback. Now, I have nothing against quarterbacks, but that's not what the psalm meant when it said, leadeth me in paths of righteousness. Whether you're a great quarterback or ballerina or musician or songstress, all of that is good and well, but that has nothing to do with the path of righteousness. That's following the commandments of God. He leadeth me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. And the paraphrase leaves that part out too, doesn't it? He helps me do what honors him most. He leads me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Why does God lead you in the paths of righteousness? You might think, well, because that's what I'm supposed to do. That's good for me. That's what I should be doing. No, he says, for his name's sake. It's for his sake. He wants his people. This brings honor to his name. It glorifies God when we walk righteously according to his commandments. So it's for his name's sake. It's kind of like Ephesians 1, that long chapter that starts the book of Ephesians. And it has that repeated phrase over and over again, to the praise of his glory, to the praise of his glory, to the praise of his glory. And it answers the question, why am I here? People are always asking that, right? Pastor, I don't understand why I'm here. Read Ephesians 1, to the praise of his glory. Why am I doing this job? Hopefully to the praise of his glory. You're here to glorify God in whatever you do, whoever you are, wherever you are, to the praise of his glory. It's all about praising God. Now, I don't mean throwing your hands in the air and singing praise songs. That's the kindergarten variety of praising God. To the praise of his glory means everything you do, how you live your life, how you speak with people, how you treat people, whether you respect people or disrespect people, how you scrupulously follow and use his righteous commandments in your life, how you love your neighbor as yourself, and how you love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. All right, anything on that one? So that falls pretty far short, I would say, in the Living Bible. It's pretty loose, and it misses a lot. Verse 4, King James, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. In Living Bible, even when walking through the dark valley of death, I will not be afraid, for you are close beside me, guarding, guiding all the way. That's a sad way of translating verse 4. First of all, yes, even though I walk through what? The valley of death? The dark valley of death? That's not what it says. I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. Death is only a shadow. Is a shadow real? Does it have any substance? Is death real for you? Is it ominous, dangerous, frightening, and all of those things? It shouldn't be for a Christian. You've already passed from death to life. It's the shadow of death that scares us. It's the unknown. It's all of those things. But this is a reminder. You're walking through the valley of the shadow of death. God has already taken care of death. It's just a shadow. Are you afraid of your own shadow? You were when you were a little child, maybe, but not now. So don't be afraid of death. It's only a shadow. We walk through the valley of the shadow of death. I will fear no evil. Why? For thou art with me. Now the paraphrase said, for you are close beside me. That leaves out too many dimensions of God being with you. Can God be beside you? Sure, maybe he is right now. Can he be behind you? Yeah. But when God is with you, isn't there a more important way that he is with you? The Spirit of God is in you. Christ is in you. God is in your heart and in your mind. Sure, he is with you. He's not just beside you. He's with you in all of those ways. I am in God and God is in me. So that falls short. I will fear no evil because of that, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. The paraphrase says, for you are close beside me, guarding, guiding all the way. That does not do justice to the symbolism of thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. What is the shepherd's rod? Anybody know? Well, yes, the law, but what was it in reality? What was the shepherd's rod?
You think that what the shepherds used to make?
Yeah, what was a rod? And what was it used for?
Wasn't it a stick for defending?
What?
Wasn't it a stick for defending?
Yes, yeah.
And the staff was
A
for guiding.
rod. A rod in the ancient world was a weapon. Yeah, it still is in the police baton. Right? It's a weapon, yeah. For unruly sheep, for belligerent rams that are not letting the little ones into the creekside to drink, who are crowding them out of the food. They get a sharp rap with the shepherd's rod. They get a strong poke in the ribs with the shepherd's rod. Moves them aside. This is what they need. Ruth is way ahead of it when she says that symbolizes the law. That's right. He's saying your law and your gospel, what? Comfort me. The staff was the famous crook on the end of the stick, and this is the gospel. God will also reach out and grab hold of you and bring you back into the safe place. And the shepherd would do that too. It's not always the rod that's needed, the staff, especially for the little ones. Grab them and pull them back where they belong. So this falls way short, doesn't it? It leaves no room for that beautiful imagery. Guarding, guiding all the way. Yeah, more than that, though. Not just guarding and guiding, but comforting. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. So when the sheep see the shepherd's staff, or rod rather, let's do that one first. When the sheep see the shepherd's rod, what do they think? Or what reaction do they have? My shepherd has a rod. I'm safe. He will protect me, whatever may come. And when the sheep sees the shepherd's staff, my shepherd loves me and takes care of me. If I'm wandering too far off, he'll bring me back. So it brought comfort to the sheep, just seeing their shepherd and seeing his rod and staff. And the comfort that brings. Same with us. God's law and gospel are for our comfort. Too many times people want to define or delineate law and gospel. Law is bad, gospel is good. No, God intended the law for our good too. Why would God spend all of that time on Mount Sinai inventing and inscribing on stone and giving to Moses the book of the law? Because that's bad for us. Does that make any sense? No. He did that because he loves us. And he wants us to see where we're wrong. The law is like a mirror, right? To see where we are wrong. To be able to repent of it. To trust in his gospel and know that he'll forgive us. So thy rod and thy staff, they still comfort me. I'm glad that I have a God and I have a church that teaches me that God with both law and gospel. So that falls short too in the paraphrase. 5, thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. The paraphrase says, you provide delicious food for me in the presence of my enemies. Wrong emphasis. What should be the emphasis of that thought, thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies? The picture is your enemies have been defeated, and now they are sitting at your feet or elsewise in your presence, while the Lord is serving you a banquet table. It's a picture of the defeat of your enemies. They're sitting in chains and shackles around the dining room. It's a celebration of a great defeat, of a great war, and you are being served by God himself. It is a declaration of independence and victory. You anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. The paraphrase, you have welcomed me as your guest. Blessings overflow. You anointed my head with oil? What is the significance of that? In the Old Testament, who got their head anointed with oil? Kings and prophets, yeah. God's way of crowning somebody. They didn't use a jeweled crown. It was the sacred oil from the temple borrowed. And this was the way of anointing, of crowning someone. You've been crowned by God as what? An heir of heaven, a co-heir of Christ, an heir of eternal life. You own whatever God owns now. He has anointed you as such. And my blessings overflow, my cup runneth over. They just a much more picturesque way of saying that. I think of Jesus, who prayed in the garden, "Let this cup pass from me. If it is possible, Father, let this cup pass from me." The cup at that time was filled with the wrath of God, and Jesus drank it to the bottom. And this is a different cup. This is the cup of blessing. The cup is full to overflowing. God is not short. If your cup gets a little low, God will fill it to the brim again. It will never empty. His grace and mercy never run out. And finally, surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life. Paraphrase is pretty much the same. Your goodness and unfailing kindness will be with me all of my life. Okay. And I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. And afterwards, the paraphrase says, and afterwards, I will live with you forever in your home. I don't know about that. Goodness and mercy will characterize me all the days of my life, your goodness and mercy. And also, I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. We dwell in the house of the Lord right now. We dwell in his presence. He dwells with us. Wherever 2 or 3 are gathered, he is with us. This is the house of the Lord. This is where his people are gathered, where his sacrament is served, where his word is preached and taught. So the idea that this comes first and then somehow, someday afterwards, I will live with you forever in your home, misses the point. I have all of that now. I have his kindness, I have his goodness and mercy, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. I am there now, I will be forever. So I think that's an example, using the Living Bible, how a paraphrase does not necessarily introduce false doctrine or promote false doctrine, but it certainly falls short in expressing what the psalmist was saying. The Old King James Version and the other modern versions too, New King James is good. They do a much better job of reflecting what the original language was saying. That's enough for today. For next time, we'll talk a little bit more about translations and what you can do to use different translations to study the Bible. Okay? It can actually be helpful. Thank you for listening.